No, I know, right? Oh, I'm gonna have to probably sit or like stand in front or something.
I'll sit here and hold the microphone.
Okay.
He's running around all day with our religious school kids. Hi, I'm Michael Schiltz.
Sean,
Good to see you.
nice to meet you. Are you Rabbi?
Yeah, we're Temple Sinai.
Oh, great.
Got about 7 minutes.
Okay. Hey.
Max from Community Composters?
Yeah. I was in the, I don't think we were in the same cohort. I was in the 2022 cohort. Yeah.
There's a lot of intersections happening.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I know, right? Yeah, random little things here and there. People I haven't seen in a while. It's really nice. Yeah.
Sounds good. You said 30 minutes.
Anybody else need a beverage, drink, anything?
Got my coffee, thank you. Probably don't need this much caffeine, but.
A lot of folks.
Yeah,
Great.
turnout.
Yeah.
I don't know how it looked last year, but is this bigger than last year or?
I don't know. I wasn't here last
Okay.
year. New to the area.
Little cue cards?
Be in
Okay.
charge of these.
Great. And how much time did you plan per person?
Well, it's a 45-minute session. 3 speakers.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I heard. 10 to 15. Okay. Okay.
I get
that's
3.
That's what I was planning on.
I got 3.
Okay.
So you just hold up the sign right when I start.
Watch it.
Right.
I think mine will run up right almost to 15, but I will.
Okay. I'll be annoying you.
No, it's good. Thanks for having those.
There's a thing called the Ignoble
Hey.
Awards they do every year.
Great start to it all.
I'm Moshe.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, Rosie. Good to meet you.
Really great start to it all. Very nice intros.
Very good speech. Very impressed.
What were you saying?
Oh, there's a thing called the Ignoble Awards. They do like weird science things that make you laugh and that make you think. And they give the awards. They have a girl about 10 years old or so.
Oh.
Walks around and actually she goes up to the speaker and says, "I'm bored. Stop talking." I'm not going to do that.
Keep it interesting.
We got plenty of kids here. They could fill in. Have you done any work with Doug?
Yeah, just on some composting stuff.
Yeah, nice.
Mostly, but
Okay,
and
cool.
then just Max.
Yeah.
a lot of things and stuff.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
If you all want to sit in the water that I'm going to be introducing you, it would be Rosie, Sean, and me.
Okay.
Do you want to slide around or something? Just all.
Yeah, perfect.
It feels really natural. Oh, and Sean, I noticed in your slides,
Yeah.
towards the end when you say who's doing what, which
Yeah.
I think is really helpful. Do you mind also shouting out that it's not just Waste Management and Public Services who are servicing businesses, but it's mostly the microhaulers like Wompost and Compost Colorado? and
Yeah,
Scratch?
sure. That was just specific to City of Denver, like our collection services. That was why I had those in there. But yeah, there's tons of others. Yeah.
No, in Denver is
Yeah.
mainly us. We're doing the apartment buildings,
Yeah.
grocery stores,
Yeah, absolutely.
all that.
Yeah. No, I'll definitely shout that out. I usually try in multiple slides. I'll try and distinguish that there's this public-private type of distinction, and knowing a lot of folks confuse that and just don't get that
Yes.
right. So I'll be sure to shout that out.
Yeah, that's where I feel like, we do a lot of businesses in Denver.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, actually, we don't really do and that's the thing is we don't do businesses. We get calls from all them.
They're super confused. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Totally.
This is expecting another speaker.
Here he
Yep.
is.
There he is.
It is, yeah. It's good for presenting. A lot of little chilly. Yep.
We're going to go in about 2 minutes.
Check.
Is there a standing mic? I guess I could do it off. I'm going to stand up.
You can also carry it.
Is that my choice? Okay.
They will. They'll go with you.
Looks like if you press the button and it's red, it's up to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to this session. I'm going to be your moderator. My name is Carolyn Pace, and I started a micro hauler called Wompost, which stands for Women-Owned Composting, about 6 years ago. I did that because there was no compost service available in my home city of Aurora, and we needed services too, and also because composting is a really powerful way to fight climate change. Fights climate change twice, which I love. So I am going to be passing it off with some amazing speakers today. I'm excited to have this opportunity to learn from and connect with our amazing panelists. Our speakers today are Rosie Briggs with Ecocycle, which is one of the oldest mission-based recyclers and zero-waste organizations in the U.S., and they've been a huge mentor for me as well with what I've done. Also, Sean Brown with the City of Denver's Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. And
welcome.
Hello? Ooh, we have a ghost.
Is this on?
It's
Great.
on.
Okay, welcome.
Oh, shoot.
If you're here for the water panel, please come forward. Yeah, come close. It'll be nice.
Eric, I think one of the other speakers, the water panel, is linked into our
flow. Yes, flow is water.
Could you go
down?
To the water panel?
Downstream toward the energy. Great. Well, thank you all for coming to the water panel. I'm Diana Lane. I'm a member of the Leadership Committee for Colorado Jewish Climate Act. In my day, I serve as the Director of Food and Water for the Colorado chapter of the Nature Conservancy. But I want to be clear that the Climate Summit is not sponsored by the Nature
Great.
Conservancy. I'm here in
Cool.
my Colorado Jewish hat. So again, thank you for coming from
Yeah.
Daily
Let's fill up
Cli-
the front first
in
and
the
second
shifting water
row.
cycle. I'm excited to have from our
Thanks for
So-
working with us.
our Rangwala Cooperative Institute.
All right, awesome. And Ian Tafoya with
Environmental
GreenLatinos,
Sciences at
which
the
is a
Uni-
national
Colorado.
nonprofit of Latino
Greg,
leaders confronting
manager
national
of
and local
demand
environmental issues in the Latino community.
and Dr. Tom Romero,
program
who is the
begin
director
with a
of the
brief
Interdisciplinary
Dvar Torah
Research
from
in
Rabbi Michael Shields, who is the associate
Quality
rabbi
at the
Temple
University of
Sinai in
Denver, as well
Dvar
as a
Torah
professor of
is
law.
a short teaching and will serve as our invocation for this program. And then after that,
So
our three speakers will each present
with
for
a
10
brief
to
Dvar
15 minutes.
Rabbi
and we
Ruth
will have a few
Gelfarb,
minutes
who
for
is the
questions
rabbi
and
for
hopefully
Synagogue of the
one or two,
Summit in
but we'll
Summit
see,
County,
with
as well as
discussion at
serving
the
as part
end.
of the clergy team
Rabbi Shields?
at Congregation Har Hashem in Boulder. A Dvar Torah is a short teaching and will serve as our invocation for the program. Our three speakers will each present for 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions and answers and
You're not supposed to
discussion
cut
at
down
the
the
end
trees,
of the
especially
program.
those that have
so again,
fruit
thank you all
on
for
them.
being here.
And you may eat from them, but you shouldn't cut them down, right? So if you're besieging a city and there's fruit trees around the wall, you can eat from the fruit trees, but don't cut them down, right? The idea of you're not to lay waste to everything living that's there. And the rabbis understood that this was a principle that was to be extended beyond war and beyond trees. It really applied to everything. And so, if destruction is the norm, then the norm is wrong, right? And so even during times of stress, you do not give in to immoral norms. And so the general prohibition against needless destruction applies to everything, to energy, to clothing, to water, to money. Other commentators conclude that wasting any resources that benefit human beings is prohibited by the Torah. Prohibited. The sages also said that if the Torah warns us not to destroy fruit trees, then we have to be even more careful about destroying the fruit itself. So it's currently today, or at least a couple years ago, all of the rabbinic authorities in the state of Israel said that if there's extra fruit and extra produce, you can't just throw it away. If it's still good for consumption, you have to make sure that those who need to consume it get to it. So the idea of, from a religious, from a holy perspective, it is against God, is unholy to waste, is embedded and still being lived out. Those Jewish values are being lived out today. So the Jewish sages also said that righteous Jews do not allow the loss of even a grain of mustard, being distressed at the sight of any loss or destruction. So it's little and big that you have to focus on. And it's each person, right? A mustard seed is usually going to be not a shared possession of a community, but in the possession of one individual. So one individual can make at least of mustard seeds don't destroy. Are we working? We're on? No, we're not. We are. We are? No? All right. Lastly, if we look at this, if you, as soon as you use resources unwisely, be it the greatest or smallest, you commit treachery against my world, it says in a text. You commit murder and robbery against my property, you sin against me. And on top of that, the rabbis talk about waste as an injustice for everybody, because some are the haves and some are the have-nots. So usually it's the haves that are wasting more. The have-nots really use what they have to the greatest extent. So it's a sin also from the haves against the have-nots. And of course, the waste that the haves create is really a problem for the have-nots, right? And think about our own communities. I live in a nice place in Highlands Ranch. I never drive by a dump site I don't see places where people are dumping industrial waste. I don't drive by a garbage dump. It doesn't mean those things don't exist. It just means in my community, perhaps we have the levers of power and the influence to make sure that those things are not put in my backyard. Right? And we see this too. Where are the communities that are being poisoned by their water? It's the communities that cannot afford to leverage influence in the halls of power. And that also the rabbis had a sense of that those who have money also have power. Those who have influence often don't have to deal with the ramifications of their own waste, whatever form it comes in. So this idea that waste is akin to idolatry, right? That's the seriousness with which the rabbis, they put waste into that category. And in fact, they say, for example, just as another example, kind of a fun text, one rabbi put, a more modern rabbi, if there's an all-you-can-eat buffet and you take more than you need, then you're committing two sins. It's doubly as bad, because you're taking food from someone who could use it, right, if you eat more, but you're also harming your own body. And so the waste that we create, or the waste that we allow, and while I think zero waste is a great goal, we all know there's some waste, natural waste, existing on Earth. But when we go above and beyond, or down and below, in terms of waste, we create these ripples, and it doesn't just impact us. In fact, it probably impacts other people way more than it impacts us ourselves. Because often, it's not universal, we find ourselves in a place of abundance. And there are other folks who find themselves in a place of waste, literally, because the waste is in their backyard. So.
Well, thank you for those thoughtful remarks. It's now my pleasure to introduce Rosie Briggs, who is the Community Education and Engagement Senior Manager at Ecocycle. This grassroots organization brought recycling to Colorado in 1976 and is also one of the only mission-based nonprofit recyclers in the US. I'd also add that they have the first EV trash truck in the country that is used for composting. Pretty awesome. Rosie has been working in the zero waste realm for a decade. Her work centers around educating, organizing, and mobilizing community members to create zero waste systems that work for them. Please take it away.
Thank you. Gonna time myself here so I don't go over. Can you hear me, everyone? Great. Hello, so wonderful to be here with you all today. My name is Rosie Briggs. I'm the Public Education and Engagement Manager at Ecocycle. I am going to kick off our panel with drawing kind of a connection between waste and climate, so you understand why waste solutions are climate solutions. And then I'm going to try to give context and tee up this policy and environmental justice discussion by talking about how these waste issues are systemic rather than individual, and therefore require some policy approaches for the solutions. So Ecocycle, Carolyn introduced us wonderfully, but we are a recycler, one of the oldest recyclers in the US via a grassroots movement, but we also do a tremendous amount of statewide infrastructural, educational, and legislative work on all of these zero waste and climate issues, along with wonderful partners like these guys to my left. So I'm going to start by drawing this connection between waste and climate by talking about consumption emissions. So the EPA has a statistic that 42% of all of our greenhouse gas emissions can be categorized under consumption-based emissions. So essentially what this is saying is that all of our stuff has a huge climate and emissions footprint from cradle to grave. So all of the emissions that result from the extraction and refining of that mineral ore that we use to make that material, all the way to production, transport, consumption, and disposal of that stuff, that has a huge climate impact. It amounts to 42% of all of our greenhouse gas emissions. So when we talk about reducing GHG emissions, we talk a lot about sectors like transportation and energy, and we should, because they have huge overlap with this 42%. But the point here is that if we're ignoring the footprint of our stuff from cradle to grave, then we're ignoring almost half of this greenhouse gas pie. We're missing a huge opportunity to take a chunk out of those emissions. So in order to illustrate that, I'm going to take you through an example with a specific material. We're going to talk about the story of aluminum, one of my favorite stories. So in order to get aluminum, we have to use this bauxite, mineral ore called bauxite. And we get bauxite almost exclusively from the tropical band of the globe, which we know to be kind of the lungs of the earth, right? It's really important that we're preserving and protecting this tropical part of our globe. Bauxite is almost exclusively in the tropics just because of the weatherization that takes place there. But we have to do some serious damage when we go in and get this bauxite. We're deforesting, we're strip mining, we're causing erosion and pollution. We're taking away resources from animals and peoples that live there. From here, the bauxite has to get turned into something. It has to get turned into alumina and then aluminum. So it has to travel great distances. Interestingly, often it goes to Iceland to be refined and processed into alumina and then aluminum. So think about all the impacts here in this tropical band of the globe, and then think about the transportation impacts of that to Iceland, right? Once it gets to Iceland or wherever it's headed, it has to undergo 2 incredibly energy-intensive processes to turn that raw mineral ore into alumina and then aluminum, so it can be turned into something like a can, right? So those processes have, again, huge emissions. From there, it has to get turned into something like a beverage can, which then is distributed all over the globe, and then the average canned beverage is consumed in under 5 minutes. So we invest so much in the life cycle of this material, which then ends up as something like a seltzer can, and then we drink out of it for fewer than 5 minutes, and then if we throw it away, then that's where it ends, right? It ends up in the landfill, and we have to do that entire process again. So to me, that's akin to like if every time we used our laptop, we just threw our laptop out the window and got a new laptop. We invested in that entire life cycle of that material, and it makes no sense for us to just keep doing that in a linear way. If we watched an alien species treat their natural resources like this, we would think that they were not very intelligent. Especially when we know that you can get aluminum through this process, or you can get aluminum from aluminum that's already made right here in Colorado. We have aluminum that's already been through this entire process, and once you have that aluminum, you can turn it back into a can as many times as you want, infinitely. So when we do that, and we opt to take this already processed, already local material to turn into a new can rather than this virgin bauxite, we save 95% of the energy, which makes a lot of sense because we're skipping that entire story that I just told you, right? We're just taking the aluminum that we have right here, melting it down into a new shape. We're skipping this entire bar graph of ecological and social impacts. Right? So it's a no-brainer. Recycling is a climate solution. It's hugely important for us to be treating our natural resources like they are valuable, because they are, and thinking about the entire life cycle rather than just focusing on disposal. So we know that recycling is a key climate solution. We know that recycling is important. But I know that you have all seen these headlines over the past few years that are making you think that recycling is broken, that it's ineffective, that you don't need to be engaging with it. This is a conversation on its own that I could talk about for simply hours. I would love to if you would like to do that with me after this. But my takeaway for this slide for you is that these headlines are talking about plastics recycling. They are not talking about the rest of the recycling world. So plastics make up under 10% of the entire recycling stream. It makes up a lot of the contamination, but when we're looking at the actual recycling stream and these materials that we're actually recovering and reusing, we're talking about these infinitely recyclable and really valuable materials like aluminum, like glass, like steel. Plastic is causing a huge ruckus, and it's really speaking for the rest of the recycling industry when it's only just a small fraction. Plastics are different than the rest of these materials because it's inherently not good at being infinitely recyclable. It's made of fossil fuels. It's not going to turn back into what it was over and over like these other materials. But additionally, we see these systemic issues at play. So when we look at the plastics producers, the plastic industry is the same as the oil and gas industry, right? It's the same industry. It's just a different product. And so as the oil and gas industry is losing its grip in these other sectors of our society, like transportation, like energy, they're ramping up their plastic production. It's not supply and demand, they're just ramping it up. In addition to that, they have subsidies that makes them incentivized to continue drilling new oil and gas to make virgin plastics rather than plastics out of the recycled content that they already produced. So for that reason, we are seeing a huge gap with plastics recycling. Plastics are not being designed for recycling, and the recycling process was never designed for a material like plastic. So yeah, this is a really huge issue. Plastics recycling has seen a lot of obstacles. Here in Colorado, we're not throwing your plastics in the ocean, we're not sending them over to China, but my takeaway for you here is that, yeah, there's a lot of issues with plastics recycling, but don't let that make you throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, right? When you stop recycling altogether because of these plastics issues, then we're losing all of these incredibly valuable resources like aluminum. So think about, the story of aluminum before you let this speak for the entire recycling solution. So we know that recycling is important, but we also know that we have to look higher on this hierarchy for the actual solutions. We can't recycle our way out of this problem, specifically when we're talking about something like plastics. We have to look upstream. We have to rethink, redesign, reduce, reuse, refuse, repair, all of these things before we get to materials recovery solutions like recycling and composting. And if we think back in living memory, we were really good at the top of this pyramid. We used to be really good at reusing and reducing and repairing. So what happened to bring us to the point where we're at now, where we're seeing, pollution like this? I don't need to spend too much time to convince you that this is an issue. But what I do want to talk about, again, to kind of tee up this environmental justice and policy discussion is this our fault? Did we do this as individual consumers? Did we make this mountain of plastic? Are we the reason that there's an island floating in the middle of the ocean full of plastic? Are we inherently lazy? Are we inherently stupid? Are we inherently wasteful? This is a conversation that I'm constantly having with people around zero waste, and it's, I think, something really important to get to the bottom of if we want to get to the real solutions. So in order to talk about whether this is our fault individually, I like to go back to World War II. So in World War II, we were necessarily resourceful. We were good at being resourceful. We were not wasteful. That is just what was happening at the time, and we were good at it because as humans, we are good at being resourceful. We are not inherently wasteful. So we're seeing these really resourceful practices during World War II, but we're also seeing those practices supported by the systems around us. So a good example of that is during this time we see stuff like flour sacks being made of this beautiful floral material because the producers of those flour sacks knew that women at this time were making their families' clothing out of stuff like a flour sack. So the producers were on the same page. They were setting you up for success and supporting you systemically in that solution. Flash forward to now, you can hardly go to a grocery store, a supermarket, and buy just regular corn in its perfect casing. You have to often settle for this plastic packaging that nobody asked for. We did not demand this plastic packaging with our consumer habits. We didn't vote with our dollars to make this happen. So what did happen here? Let's look at the end of World War II, so the war was winding down, and there was this huge push federally and industrially for ramping up consumerism. So essentially what was happening is that humans were too good, we were too resourceful, we were too good at keeping our valuable resources were conserved, and so we weren't stimulating the economy enough. So there was this big push, especially by packagers, where they said, okay, all of our products are going into American homes, and that's where they're staying because people are repairing, they're reusing, right? How do we get these products through these households rather than just into them? So at this time, there was this famous packaging and plastics conference where the editor of Modern Packaging magazine, Lloyd Stouffer, had this famous keynote speech where he said the future of our products is in the trash can. We need to be designing these plastics for the trash can, and we need to teach the American public that this stuff is not too good to throw away. So what they're essentially saying is we need to design these things for the trash can, and we need to teach Americans how to be wasteful because they're not inherently wasteful. So I'm obsessed with these post-war advertisements because they are creepy. I will start with this one. It's a Dixie cup dispenser. So it's advertising Dixie cups, but it's really talking about, it's pushing this lifestyle. It's saying, wouldn't it be so easy if you just threw this all away? Your life would be easier. And it's a dispenser. It's infrastructure that you have to keep refilling. If you have this dispenser on your wall, you have to keep buying these stupid little cups, and we're going to get a lot of stupid little cups to cycle through your house. This one is not even advertising a specific product. It's just saying, look at this woman on the left who's trying to deposit her bottles for a refund, which then will get reused. What a loser. Wouldn't you rather be this woman on the right who just chucks everything into a can, easy breezy, beautiful? We're teaching you how to do this behavior. We know that this is not natural behavior because it was forced on us. If it was natural, we wouldn't have to be taught to do this, right? We see a lot of really creepy plastics propaganda at this time as well. It's really feeding on patriotism, on things being natural, on things being kind of biological. So again, they're trying to convince us that this is our nature when we can see that it's not. Plastics, yum yum, American as apple pie. Plastics are so delicious, don't worry about it. It's totally natural, feed it to your son. I will give a warning for this next one. It is a little bit disturbing, but it's very clear what they're going for. Huh? The best things in life come in cellophane. That's how babies are made, you guys. We might be DuPont, but it's so natural. It's human. Don't worry about it. Don't be scared. So they were forcing it down our throat, and we were resisting the entire time because inherently we are not wasteful. In the 70s, we see this huge surge of environmentalism where people are actively and explicitly calling out these producers and these packagers to take responsibility for their mess. At this time, we see this iconic ad. I'm sure you're familiar. It comes out from Keep America Beautiful. Let's take a look at the tagline. It says, sorry, Carolyn. It says, people start pollution, people can stop it. So this ad, the entire point of this ad is saying, look at this river, it's disgusting. You guys did that. You put the trash in this river. It is up to you to clean it up. This ad was effective because we care, because we saw this and we said, oh my God, I do care about environmental justice. I am willing to take responsibility for this. This was effective because we are good and we are ready to take action. Let's look at who Keep America Beautiful is. It's these guys. These guys are Keep America Beautiful. These guys literally took their product, put it in a physical river to shoot an ad where they paid an Italian-American actor, this man is not indigenous, to shed a tear and then convince an entire generation plus of Americans that the river was full of trash because of them, not because of these producers who specifically designed their products to be trash and then taught us how to throw it out a window. That is wild. So my point here is that this is systemic. It's not up to us to individually solve this problem. This has been a narrative fed to us specifically so that we will be confused about what the solutions are. The solutions are systemic, and that's where we should find hope. So context for Colorado, just before I kick it over to these guys to talk about the specific Colorado policies. We have in Colorado been subject to all of this mess, all of this bamboozlement, but also because we tend to focus so much on the downstream impacts of waste rather than the entire life cycle, like I've been talking about, our waste policies get really closely tied to landfill rates, landfill prices. So out here in the West, we have a lot of space, and we're not a coastal community, so we can't see a lot of the actual physical impacts of stuff like plastic pollution. So historically, it's been harder for us to pass policies and put funding toward these waste diversion efforts. But that said, we have made huge strides in the past few years, and we should be so proud of how far we've come. Again, you'll hear more about that from these guys, but I just want to give a little sneak preview for one of the bills that I'm specifically really excited about. It passed last session. It's the extended producer responsibility. So this bill essentially does exactly what I've been talking about. It says, hey, producers, the mess in this river is not because we are stupid and lazy. It's because this is your mess, and you need to take responsibility in helping us clean it up. And the money that you do that with will then fund free recycling for all Coloradans starting next year. So that is huge. This is a great example of how we can get through all of this bamboozlement and all of this, the veil that people have, that the producers have put over our eyes and make real solutions with. So my takeaways for you today are recycling works as a climate solution, but it doesn't stop there. We have to look above that hierarchy. It's not your fault that the ocean is full of plastic. You have individual power, tremendous tremendously, certainly, but as a community and as at a systems level is where we can take action. We know that we are not wasteful, we know that we care, and we know that we're ready to take these actions, so that is where we should find hope. That is my time. I will pass it on now.
Thank you, Rosie. Real quick, who has a question already? Raise the hands. Okay, awesome. So, other folks, let's just be mindful and leave some time for people to be able to ask questions at the end. I am now delighted to introduce Sean Brown, who is an education program assistant with Denver's Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. Sean is part of the diversion and education team, where he spends his time educating at Denver-based events, like this Climate Summit, researching waste topics, and partnering with all sorts of groups and increasing Denver's diversion capabilities. Let me get yours queued up. You can press the next button there, right there. Go for it, Sean.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I'm Sean. Nice to meet you. As mentioned, I'm with DOTI and specifically solid waste management. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how city services work. I'm trying to give you some more context around waste streams and the ecosystem of waste and how this kind of all fits together. That's one of the biggest topics I talk about on a regular basis, helping folks understand where the city starts, where the city ends, where private starts, where private ends, and all the in-betweens. So we've got kind of the how it works, the waste streams, single versus multi-stream, the economic realities of this. What about waste? Some hard to recycle items. I'm talking about kind of the difference in hard to recycle versus just regular recycling systems, kind of what Rosie alluded to. Myths and disinformation, some legislation that's current or in the pipeline, and then kind of a little who does what we do. I'll help separate, again, also differentiate between private haulers and such, and then some education and resources so you can take away some concrete actions to use. So with waste streams, I love to point out that waste streams are diverse and they cover a lot of different materials themselves and a lot of different collectors and processors. So on the left here, we have our carts, specifically trash, compost, and recycling. Again, this is just one of the many waste streams. We have to kind of narrow these into specifically like what works and where. We can't accept, let's say biohazardous sludge from wastewater streams into our carts because there's just nowhere to process them like that. It would contaminate other materials, et cetera. So the way that the waste industry works is you start to separate out streams like this, and each end of the stream kind of has an economic viability to it. The person on the end or let's say the processor, is then selling it to maybe someone buying on the end, or let's say there's no buyer on the end. That usually is a subsidized material or a subsidized waste stream that we say as a society or as a government says, this is advantageous enough for us to pour money into so that this isn't left unkept or left without some sort of collection system for it. So again, we've got the carts on the end. We've got everything from household hazardous waste to industrial hazardous waste to construction and demolition, and that goes again from the household to the industrial level too. Lots of streams to talk about. I could possibly not name all of them today. That'd be a lot to get through. But as far as single versus multi-stream, a lot of us are very familiar with single stream. I know that's how it works in Denver. I'm pretty sure that's how it works throughout the Front Range, and I'm pretty sure that's how it works for most municipalities in the U.S. I don't know of many multi-stream municipal collection systems. If we have them, they're pretty rare. They're much more common in Europe and Asian countries. The pros to this is it's more convenient and easier to get everything together. It can be even more convenient for the collector, us, to collect things this way, less routes, less trucks, less time. So there is an efficiency to it, there is a benefit to it. But the cons come with just the very opposite of that, which is we can get a lot of contamination. There's a lot more education to do. We need to make sure we're getting the right materials into these single stream buckets. There can be a lower quality of materials, which means the buyer on the end maybe isn't paying as much for the bale of cardboard that's greasy instead of just perfectly clean. that has an impact back upstream to how much the processor pays, and then how much the city pays, and then how much the resident pays for their carts. So sometimes we think of, well, easy or convenient means lower cost, but in fact we can see ramifications of cost kind of seep back in the other direction for us. So there's, again, a lot to cover on single versus multi-stream, but again, most of you are familiar with single stream. That's what we do, typically in the US. However, again, a lot of benefits to multi-stream, so it's always something to consider. With the economic realities, I like to point out kind of like what not just the city is up against, but what like processors are up against too, what private waste haulers and private, even end market buyers are up against. We have what's called that market failure, which is basically the price of the product fails to reflect the true production cost. This is kind of what Rosie was alluding to with plastics. If we actually paid to recycle the plastic, or basically like downstream it to the point that it made economic sense, you'd probably see a higher cost on your products that you're paying that are wrapped in plastic. That ear of corn may actually cost more with the plastic on it if we were to realize the true cost, and then maybe more expensive than the one with the natural with the natural ear on it. And so that's like a thing we have to really realize in our economy and society, which is really ramping up these true costs to meet the economic reality of the times we're in. Another example is the tragedy of the commons and the under-provisioning of public goods. These two kind of go hand in hand together, which if you're familiar with the tragedy of the commons, it's basically we have a common good, and unfortunately a few bad actors that usually tend to ruin that or tend to take more resources. And we had the Rabbi talk about how it's a sin to take more than what you should be taking. And that kind of applies to here too, which is like, I'll give an example from the city standpoint, public dumpsters. We've had a lot of clamoring to get those back. However, the problem with them is once we introduce a dumpster that everyone has access to, we get such bad contamination rates, and the collection costs then skyrocket, and then we're not actually processing and getting the value out of the materials that were put into the dumpster in the first place. So there's this tragedy of the commons, and then I like to say these two go together because we also have a simultaneous under-provisioning of public goods. The dumpster is a great example of that too. It should be a public good that's available to everyone to dump your electronic recycling or your styrofoam or whatever hard-to-recycle material that a dumpster would be great for. But we have these competing factors, which is the more we open it up, or sometimes, and this is what I'll say, is like sometimes that we almost have this like pilot project mode, which is we pilot something like a public good, and then it gets trampled by the tragedy of the commons, and then we say, well, let's not do that, and then we under-provision that public good. And we're kind of left in this loop in this cycle happening where we never fully provision the public good so that we can just deal with the cost of the tragedy of the commons, and we never really realize that we can actually get to that full kind of saturation point. So those all work really hand in hand, and those all impact directly what the city contracts, that directly impacts how processors and market buyers are looking at each of these markets and how they're reacting to them. To the right here, you have a nice little quote from a kind of recent paper from 2023 that said, when the recycling commodity markets were most lucrative in 2011, our US recycling costs were as little as $3 per household annually. When markets reached a minimum kind of cost basis in 2018 and 2020, I don't know if anyone knows in 2017 what happened there, the China's national sword policy came into effect, and then 2020 with COVID, those costs skyrocket to $34 to $42 per household. So we're looking like a tenfold increase over a decade in which end markets close down, and therefore you get into this market failure, which is all of a sudden we've realized the true production costs and the true cost of the items that we're trying to throw away or trying to just toss in our bins. And so this can flip on a dime really quickly when we think we have these nice, easy systems. Again, plastics being a great example where we had China just saying, give us all your plastic, and then they shut it off, and then our costs skyrocket. So we have to be very mindful of the circularity and locality of our systems here. I'll give some plugs for hard to recycle items. Again, I talked about with the different waste streams. There's so many different hard to recycle items, and the way that we as a city tend to approach this is we say, honestly, it usually tends to bump up against our collection methods. So I don't know exactly how TreeCycle got started, but my guess is Once upon a time, we were collecting so many trees in the back of our hoppers, and we were like, you know what, this doesn't make a lot of sense. And we should probably start a program to collect trees and to mulch them and to get them out of our single landfill waste stream system. That was not only a benefit to the residents, it was a benefit to the city and its cost and transportation and structural logistic cost. And then again, we have these external environmental benefits too. So sometimes these hard to recycle systems can be approached from kind of the government standpoint, but then also it doesn't mean that we solve everything either. To the right here, you have the kind of household hazardous waste and Ecocycle programs. We put in subsidies to lower the cost for each resident for these programs so that basically it's worth it for the city to say, yes, let's pour in $200,000 to recycle e-waste because it's actually going to cost the city $5 million if we don't do anything about it, and we have to go remediate sites, or we have to go reject whole loads of recycling because everyone decided to put their electronics in there. There's a lot of implication to those extraneous costs, and so oftentimes the government is putting in programs to say, this is not only a benefit for everyone, but this is going to actually lessen our cost down the road too. Leaf drop might be a really kind of almost weird one. I was just listening to a podcast about leave the leaves, how we actually want to, for the environmental benefit, to leave the leaves on the ground, allow microbial and small little organism systems to flourish. Leaf drop, it kind of goes against the wind of that, but at the same time, from the city standpoint, we had tons of people just throwing it in their trash carts. We had them just leaving it in the waterways, and so the actual cost to the city was a lot more. So again, we have this program called Leaf Drop, which may not be the most ecologically friendly way to do it, but has these extra earth benefits as well as cost benefits to us. We talked about myths and disinformation with Rosie a little bit. Yeah, no, recycling is not broken. We could spend a lot of time on, partitioning out each one of these myths, but to start off and just hit a couple of them, no, recycling is not broken. It is plastics that is the messy one. If you talk about metal recycling, glass recycling, cardboard and paper recycling, all really good categories that we really want to stick to. It's just the plastics, which is the problem area. Trust your local recycler, not necessarily the product on the shelf. Again, this is kind of like I don't say anti-consumption thing, but be weary of this. There's a profit motive to the products on the shelves. Hefty, to the picture you see here, was sued in multiple states for pushing these these recycling bags, these clear translucent bags that you can just tie up your recyclables in, put them in your cart. We don't accept bagged items. Most municipalities do not. I'd say it's actually very, very few and far between. Very little municipalities accept that at all. So these Hefty went out and said, we found one that said yes, and they basically marketed it to the whole U.S. thinking that that's an acceptable way to do that. Again, they were sued for about $5 million for fraudulent market practices. So trust the local recycler and what they say is recyclable, because these recyclers have poured millions of dollars into high-tech systems to either sort out this material or this material or this material, but they don't have an extra $1 million or an extra $2 million to go debag everything. And so, again, who bears that cost? We all bear that cost when we just say convenience is key and we just kind of let it be. But Hefty is the one who profits from all that. The other myth, they'll just sort it out wherever it goes. I have audited many Denver residents' carts before. I have opened up, let's say, a compost cart, and this one sticks out in my mind. It was 3/4 full, which I thought was going to be wonderful, but it was all wrapped plastic packaged goods from the grocery store still. It's like if you took it right off the shelf and just threw it in the cart. So there's full chicken with fully wrapped. It was very odd for me to see. I said, hey, what's going on here to the resident? They said, well, I just thought you sorted that all out. I just thought you ripped everything open. And I was like, do you understand how we would do that with 180,000 households per week and go hand tear? That's not even feasible. Your costs would be $1,000 per month for us to recycle your items then. So it is this myth of they'll just figure it out wherever it goes. Follow the rules. The rules are there in place usually because there's an economic incentive for them to be in there, and there's a reason for this facility cannot process this or whatever that case may be. Some materials can be recycled multiple times. Aluminum soda cans are the best example for that. Wonderful recyclable material. Let's just stick to that, and let's try to really lean into those products. Regulation and enforcement, I won't go through each one of these. It's just a nice little subset of the last couple years of stuff that's happened in Denver, Front Range, Colorado in general. Extended producer responsibility is one of the really exciting ones that we'll get to start to actually push back on different industries and different manufacturers for making the products they do. Again, by extended producer responsibility, what we're essentially saying is like, we're going to realize the true production cost of all these materials. So if in fact, a paper packaged material is in fact cheaper than a plastic one, we're going to see those costs start to right size with each other. The market will actually start to correct itself in that regard when these bills are fully realized. Who does what? Again, I could go really deep into this, but basically you have Republic Services and Waste Management are the two City of Denver processors. On the private side of things, Denver is just the collector for all this. We don't make any of the rules for recycling materials. We don't make any of the rules for compost materials. We are pretty much we're kind of in between a rock and a hard place. We're at the whim of the private market saying we can or cannot accept these materials, and we're at the whim of residents saying, I don't want to do this. We're basically, kind of trying to balance both those actions there. I'll give a plug for Wompost because there's so many private compost services covering a lot of the private market right now. Again, I'm just talking specifically about the public market and what the city covers. We cover 180,000 households. There's a lot more households still in Denver and a lot of private businesses still not being serviced or being met by services like Wompost. So there's a really, really good balance of services available right now, and because of folks like her, we've had a lot more access to the marketplace like that. I'll skip through this. I know I'm running out of time. We've done a little education and auditing. We've really ramped up a contamination auditing program for the City of Denver residents. Basically, we want to make this like an actual cultural thing. For probably 20 plus years, Denver residents have been very fortunate not to really get audited too much. You guys haven't really been pushed to the brink of let's follow these rules. That's changing a little bit. I'm kind of really tamping down on this stuff. Here's some of the stuff I saw from decontaminating one of the first districts we rolled out compost to. Let's just say there's a really high barrier to education and getting everyone on board with this. I found needles, knives, Game of Thrones books, everything you can think of. And in the middle there is that picture of like wrapped chicken it's still just in its packaging, which is a little odd to see sometimes. Some resources and services. If you want to quickly scan these, go ahead. If you don't want to catch it afterward, that's fine too. We've just got a bunch of stuff. Basically, all of our hard to recycle programs are supporting all this other stuff. Ecocycle, household hazardous waste, our seasonal events like Tree Cycle and Leaf Drop, mulch giveaway, things like Keep Denver Beautiful, paint, care, recycling, etc. And so, I've got lots of resources, lots of programs for anyone in Denver to take advantage of. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sean. We'll just keep this resources page up here if you want to look at it. It is now my honor to introduce Ian Tafoya, who currently serves as the Colorado State Director for GreenLatinos. Ian is active in the Denver Public Affairs, Colorado Public Policy, and Federal Environmental Policy. Ian has received recognition for his work from the Denver Regional Council of Governments, the Denver Regional Air Quality Council, named a River Hero by the National River Network, and was recently elected the co-chair of the Colorado Environmental Justice Action Task Force. You can follow Ian at the hashtag @BelieveIan, EAN, on all platforms. Take it away 10 minutes, and then hopefully we'll have time for a question or two.
Sure, thanks everyone. And I got to find out where you got that bio, because the Environmental Justice Task Force actually ended couple years ago, but it's a good thing, and I'll get to it in just a second. I guess right off the bat, who here lives in Denver? Because you've heard a lot about Denver, so about half the people live in Denver. I'm going to take a chance to talk about a few other issues that are more statewide and I think federal in scope, though there was a slide a few pieces ago that talked about Waste No More, which is something that I do want to cover. A law that I helped write and is now effectively in law in Denver, Colorado, requiring recycling, composting in the commercial sector. So if you rent a building, or if you have a grocery store, or you go to a large event, right, on that commercial side that's trying to fill the gap that the city doesn't have domain over, was really about trying to bring parity between the two of those. I'm also happy just to announce, because I see some of my friends in the audience, that I recently got a promotion that was just announced a couple days ago. I'm the Vice President of GreenLatinos National now for state programs. Thank you for celebrating that with me. But, what I want to talk about is that all of this success, the work that the city is doing, the community members like myself who collect ballot issues, the people who go and testify to make sure that this producer responsibility legislation passes, the things that Ecocycle does, it's all civics in action, okay? Like we're here actively working on this in so many roles and in so many ways because civics is inherently important in order to achieve these things. And so as you're listening today and what you heard here today, I just want people to be thinking that this takes scientists and advocates and people who run meetings, people who want to testify, entrepreneurs who want to start businesses are incredibly important at this time. And there's resources to do that. We've fought to create those resources. So as you're just sitting in this and you should go throughout the whole day, when you're learning about all these different issues, I just want you to know that we're just 3 people of millions of people, in Colorado, across the state, across the United States, and certainly even in Latin America and other places that people are speaking up about this. And so, just don't feel alone, I think is one of the biggest things. And if you feel like participating, yes, it starts with making sure that you put these in the right place. I'll be honest with you, if we open up the trash that's outside here today to audit what happened at breakfast, we probably didn't get it 100%, right? Education is so key. And what I think is that education leads to an efficient system, right? I think that's what you heard here, right? The more we know, the more we use the system right, the more we use our voice to tell our friends, hey, they're not using the system right, makes it more efficient. But the inputs is what you heard in the beginning. And I just want to point out that, it's not just plastics that are connected to the oil and gas industry, so are pharmaceuticals, so are food additives, that there is a larger network of products that are ending up in waste streams in a lot of places. And so I just want to pivot for a second and just say, it's not just about what goes to your landfill. It's also what ends up the upstream. You heard this earlier, right? What are the impacts when they show you a mine in the ground? What happens to the rock they don't use and process? It actually sits somewhere and it leaches chemicals into the water, and that impacts things further down. And then there's an additive cost if people are pulling their drinking water from there. If they are aware, they have to spend money to clean it up. If they're unaware, then those people are being exposed to toxic water pollution. This is what we saw in Flint, Michigan, for example. Let's not get it twisted. It doesn't happen here in America. That doesn't happen here in Colorado, because it does. And we have thousands of abandoned mines that are legacy mines, that those businesses have gone out of business, and who is responsible for them now, okay? Similarly, so from mining and the waste products that are being left, we're transitioning from coal power plants, right? But when you burn coal, it doesn't burn everything. There's something left over that's called coal ash. At every single one of these power plants that burn coal, there is waste that is still sitting there, hopefully being managed correctly, but needs to go somewhere in order to be processed and not enter into our environments, right? And why I'm trying to make this intention to you is because waste interfaces in our lives in all sorts of ways. I even heard the Rabbi saying this earlier about those that have and those who don't have. Think, for example, those that are unhoused on the streets, who don't have an address and therefore don't have access to trash receptacles. Then take, for instance, churches and religious institutions and community groups that bring upon them free meals on Sundays. What happens if 9 people bring you a meal on Sunday wrapped in a plastic with a plastic fork, and you don't have trash service and you don't have a refrigerator? Who's responsible for that? The people that it's being put on, or the people who think that they're being generous? Right? It's more complex, and I really want you to think through that. I'll give you another example, and I only know this because I've done service work with Unhoused with a group called Headwaters Protectors, which is about reducing this kind of waste and helping people have access to clean water. But I can tell you, I've met neighbors who put their couch outside, and then a month later, they see it at a homeless encampment 3 blocks away, and they're mad because it's their couch, right? They're mad that, how dare these people, they're getting all set up, they got their tent, they're trying to, have some dignity and privacy by putting up a tarp by their house. But we have this throwaway culture, right? Like, oh, not here, it's not here. Like, you didn't think twice about where your couch went. You prayed, it went to someone who needed it until it was a homeless person in your neighborhood who needed it. And then you weren't okay with it, right? So I'm trying to address that to what the rabbi was saying. Hazardous waste and this conversation about mining waste, what's in our water, brown fields, which, old businesses that have left their legacy and gone away, and who's responsible for fixing it. These are interspersed in everyone's community. Like, you think it might not be touching you, but I can show you the maps that they are. And so, again, I want to come back to power of education. Like, if this is your first environmental summit you've ever been to, go to more. Tell your friends. Knowledge is key. It helps us break down this intentional disinformation that is occurring. And GreenLatinos National, that I work for, we've done intensive research at the intentional disinformation in Spanish, right? Like, they target these businesses. You saw their marketing from 1950. You don't think they have people sitting in a room that are like, well, maybe if we create these Twitter bots and we drive this narrative here, and Chevron wants to spend $1 million during the Super Bowl, and I can tell you in plastic side that in Copa America this year, which was a big international soccer, the plastics industry ran like $18 million in ads, intentionally targeting certain communities, right? And they have the data to do it because we're all on our phone all of the time. And so we need to really be flexing our skills at judging what's being put in our face. And I know that can be incredibly difficult. I want to touch on an example across the state that helped us fight for producer responsibility, getting recycling in people's communities, okay? That's really what this is about. The low income, and what makes a community necessarily low income? It could just be the fact that it's a small city by comparison to Denver, for example, right? I've been to San Luis in the San Luis Valley, where you're in a room with 150 people, and that's like 80% of the people that live in the city of San Luis, right? And so we get a question from an elder there, and she's like, my granddaughter says I shouldn't burn my trash. She's like, is that true? And I was like, yeah, ma'am, no, you shouldn't burn your trash, especially not. And so I don't know if you're familiar with this there, but they have these canals that are ancient, like hundreds of years old from when the New Mexicans and the Hispanic people came forward. They're called acequias. She literally burns it in her acequia. So now your water that's going to grow your food and that ash is sitting there. And so when we told her about that, she was like, okay. So then others started to come forward with their stories. And they were like, well, actually, and it's so interesting, in Alamosa, which is in the same valley, but 50 miles away, they have multi-stream recycling. It's pretty impressive. Like, you drive up in there, and you can pull out, and you're like, glass here, number 2's here, number 7's here, and it's a great system. But the people in San Luis Valley told me, I can't afford the gas to drive, and the time to drive 2 hours just to take my recycling. Like, that we can't even get people to take their plastic out of their chicken to put it in a bin behind their house, but we have this expectation that others have to do that, right? And so we're trying to create systems that allow them, to have access to the same kind of resources that others have. Hazardous waste division is one that, in my experience of working in the state of Colorado, is the one that people are listening engaged at. They have their commission meets every month, and hundreds of people show up and testify on a regular basis. The Water Commission has meetings, and fewer people show up, but lawyers for the businesses seem to show up. But they happen every month. The Hazardous Waste Committee happens 4 times a year, and I've been to it twice, and nobody goes. Not even the waste people go, right? And why am I telling you that? Because I'm trying to show you that if this is an issue that is of interest to you, that your voice can go a long way there, right? I have, across the country and across the state of Colorado and locally, when you show up with like 10 people and no one's testified there in like 10 years, like, they're like, oh shit, 10 people showed up, and they take it serious. I'm just gonna be real with you. Like, the way those meetings will go, and they'll be like, okay, so it's time for public comment. All right, no public comment, we continue to go, because they're not used to it. And so we have to change that energy, right? But I also want to talk about the energy of what it's like to work with the government, because I've worked for 3 branches of local government. I know it's not easy to be in the government and take it. and you're limited. You're limited by laws that are unjust. You're limited by rules that are difficult to challenge. Bureaucratic efforts from the 1970s forward that are trying to limit our power on said corporations. So I just want to encourage you to try to build a rapport. Build a rapport in particular when you're working with government officials, because they can help you. You need people on the inside too, and it can be really, really challenging without them. The last two things that I want to cover, because I think I'm running out of time here, is I just want to raise a couple issues that continue to come up, and particularly after COVID, incinerators and plastic and medical waste, right? Medical waste and COVID seem to drive this conversation back towards single-use plastics, right? This is the safest. Now it's not just the most convenient, it's the safest. It's the safest for our communities. And so where is all that going to go if it's not being downgraded into good plastic and not worth things? There are some communities around the country, and actually our own University of Colorado hospital, that burn it at a really high temperature. And they get a permit from the Environmental Protection Agency and a permit from the state to burn it and be safe. But do you think that they burn it 100%? What happens to that little bit of percent that makes it through? And what does that impact on the localized community? And if you live in a community that the zoning, historically, we're talking 100 years ago, set it up that this is industrial, and because of redlining, this is where black and brown people live, or at this point, really, it depends on the community you're in. Because if you're in Greeley, for example, it's Hispanic, Latino immigrants that have come here, and Somalis. But if you're in Aurora, you might see 100 different groups of people from different backgrounds, all immigrants, but all being subjected to this. And if there's a word I want you to learn today as you go through this, water, waste, it's called cumulative impacts. It's this idea that you have a cup, and if everybody pours in an ounce, eventually this cup overflows, right? And what is that interactive impact on communities? That's at the heart of what the work I've done with environmental justice communities is like. It's exhausting to have to fight this permit, and fight this permit, and fight this permit, and fight this permit. And this is why I want to lastly come back to civics in action, and that is, if you got involved, if 5 of you got involved in fighting this one, and 5 of you got involved in fighting this one, and 5 of you got involved in helping this one, that helps the localized community who's feeling really overwhelmed. That's a way for people to use what others might call privilege. I would just say using your time the way you choose to, right? Use your time to help those people if that's your calling. And then I'm just going to close by saying we have a program at GreenLatinos that is all about trying to do this education. We are helping small food trucks and businesses change their ways in order to reduce less waste, and then help educate on the front end so that collectively we're improving this, and that we might be at an egregious, I don't know, you would probably know the newest numbers, but are we 40% at recycling? It's less, isn't it?
We do 16% in Colorado of all recyclable things are recycled. And that includes composting, too.
And Denver is a little better? Just a little bit better. Okay, so those
one of the worst in the country.
Yeah, there you go. So we're bad. And we set up these programs to make it better, but it requires civics in action. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming to this panel. Unfortunately, you might have looked at your watch and seen that our time is completely up, which happens when people are talking about really interesting things. So I'm going to invite you to turn to the person next to you, introduce yourself, and if you have a question, ask it to somebody else that you haven't met here. And maybe you can figure out a solution or figure out who you should be asking for your question. I also invite you to come speak to our panelists. Rosie is doing another Q&A for all of your burning questions after lunch. So you'll have a chance to do some more Q&A there. Finally, please enjoy lunch. And Wompost, we're sponsoring and doing all of your compost recycling and landfill waste for this event. I will personally be taking those bags and sorting out the contamination with my hands, and I'm 5 months pregnant. So do not put the wrong things in the wrong bags. and help somebody else to do that as well. I think that's everything that we wanted to say. We have a great wrap up at the end of the summit with great music and some closing inspiration from a number of speakers, including Casey Becker, the former Speaker of Colorado's House of Representatives. And awesome.
And she was the EPA Region 8 director.
Oh, yep. And most recently, the head of the EPA's Mountain Plains regions under President Joe Biden. I just read what they give me, you know. So make sure you stick around and come to that and make some new friends and talk about some of these ideas that you've heard here. Thank you so much.